All right, so good morning, everybody. Today is Tuesday, May 18th. It is approximately 10 a.m. Welcome, one and all, to the Indiana Mid-Year Teleconference. My name is John Miares, and most of you have heard from me before. I am the stat in charge of the June area survey, and I am the group leader over the surveys team here at the Great Lakes Regional Field Office in East Lansing, Michigan. Before we get too far, I want to go over a few basic Brown rules. First, as a reminder, please keep your phones on mute when you're not speaking so we can minimize the amount of background noise interfering with the presentation. If you do not have a mute button on your phone, then you can press *6 to unmute your phone. Then you can also press *6 to unmute your phone when you're ready to ask a question. I am recording this session, and hopefully we will have it posted to the Purdue site. If not by the end of the day, then definitely by the end of the week, for the benefit of those who may not be here today, and for those who may need to go back and listen to a portion of this presentation again. My goal is to be done by 11:30, but there is a chance that we could go longer if people have questions, and I don't want to end the teleconference prematurely until we're confident that people's questions have been asked. At the same time, my assumption is hopefully you've already reviewed the material on the website, that you've read through the manuals. We've been working on this project now. For those of you who've been working pre-screening, we've been working on it since March. You've had conversations, hopefully, with your supervisor about this survey. You've played with the CAPI instrument during CAPI training. And so what we're doing here today is going to be putting the finishing touches on your training before we set you loose to do data collection. Moving on to slide 2 really quickly. As far as the plan for this morning, there are 2 major topics. Of course, just as a reminder, the presentation that we're going to be covering here today can be found on the June area website. If you scroll down on the left-hand column, there is an area called May Training Info. And near the bottom left of that, it says May Teleconference Slides New for May 17th. We just posted those up there yesterday. And on slide 2, we have today's agenda. We're going to be talking about 2 major topics. We've got the what we call the NERD pilot, and we are going to be talking about the logistical issues for the June area survey. But before we go into that, I would like to turn over the floor to our state statistician for Indiana, Nathaniel Wierenski, for some opening remarks. Nathaniel?
Good morning. It's good to be with you guys. I believe this is my second training with most, if not all of you. I want to start a little bit. First of all, I want to express my appreciation for all the good work that you guys do. I've been on many conferences where people are familiar with you, our citizens are familiar with you, and they greatly appreciate all that you do. Let me assure you that they are looking forward to what that we put out over the next couple of months related to June survey and our other June surveys that we all have going on. That includes Indiana Farm Bureau Extension Service and other of our stakeholders that we have. So keep up the good work. They rely on you guys. I appreciate and enjoy the association that has with NASA. Thank you, John.
All right, thank you, Nathaniel. So I'm going to be going on to slide 3. So for this part of the presentation, I want to talk about something called the June Crops APS Automated NERD Pilot. And, well, that begs 2 questions. First, what does APS stand for? People weren't necessarily aware of that. APS is short for Acreage, Production, and Stocks. That's the survey that we've historically called the Quarterly Crop Stock Survey or the Quarterly Agricultural Survey. NERD stands for Non-Edited Respondent Data. And in this year's June Crops APS survey, we are going to be conducting a test where data reported on previous quarterly surveys is going to be carried forward in CAPI to be verified by enumerators during interviews in June. Now, last September, this was tested on a very small scale with a very small sample of potential respondents using EDR only. But now we're going to make this available in CAPI as well, provided that the data that are in there were not edited or changed between what was reported by the respondent and what ended up being the final value in the data set. So, moving on to slide 4. Here again, we're seeing this definition where NERD stands for non-edited respondent data. The key is that we're going to be using raw, unedited data from the respondent or the operator, whether it was reported last quarter, by mail, online, over the phone with a call center enumerator, or over the phone with you in CAPI. Might have been from December, might have been from March. Not likely it would have been from September, but the key is, though, sometimes in order to clean up these records when we get them from the respondent, we end up having to modify things because either stuff gets lost in translation or we need to adjust the acres to get things to balance or to make sure that total cropland totals that are reported will account for all the crops that were reported. So if we have any data that was reported by an operator that was modified by a stat in the office before it became final, then the record is going to be ineligible for the test. But if somebody reported either by mail, online, or by phone some information and it went all the way through to the edit as clean, then we're going to hopefully have that data available for you in CAPI pre-filled so that you're basically just verifying what was previously reported. So I'm looking on slide 5 now. What will you be able to see in CAPI? Well, what you and the operator are going to be able to see if they fill out the form online using the AgCounts website, data recorded from the previous survey is going to be pre-filled in the appropriate boxes. And it'll be available for either you or for the operator to see when you're entering the record. And on this slide, what we have is an example of the NERD data pre-filled for acres owned, rented from others, rented to others, total acres operated, total cropland. Now, what you're not going to see that's given to us is what survey this came from. What I would say is probably most of this data came from the March quarterly ag survey. Some of it might have come from the December ag survey, but I can't say for certain sure. And that information about which survey the data came from is not available. I'm going on to slide 6. What you're seeing there is a table where you're going to see the commodities that could possibly have this NERD data, this non-edited respondent data, pre-filled in CAPI. The first values that we're seeing here, like land owned, land rented from others, total land operated, cropland, grain storage capacity, those are questions we ask every single quarter. Most of the other values that are there, the winter wheat planted, wheat harvested, oats planted, barley, corn, soybeans, dry beans, a lot of that would have been recorded in March. It's possible that the wheat seedings might have been recorded from December when we asked it then. Now, that's not to say that the planting intentions in a previous month wouldn't have changed since last quarter, but it does give us a place that we can start from. So on slide 7, so now that you have this data, the question is, how are we going to use it? So when you see these questions pre-filled in your CAPI instrument, you're basically going to be asked to remind respondents what was previously recorded and then ask them if it's still correct. We do have to be careful in how we do this, so we aren't just going to lead the respondent to give us the same answer back that we had, that they gave us before. On slide 8, what we're recommending, again, they're calling this the remind still method, where you ask, last time we recorded so many acres of whatever, cropland, corn, soybeans, and then you ask, is this still correct. Now, what we want to be careful is not to say, last time you reported X number of acres of cropland, corn, soybeans, etc., because we don't necessarily know if the person you're talking to is the person who did the report last time. It might be a spouse, it might be a partner, it might be the operator. So we want to use words that will remind the operator of what we recorded for their operation. And when we say what we recorded, we're talking about possibly NAS if something was mailed in or done online, or NASDA if the data were collected over the phone. And again, we don't know when the data was necessarily collected. Most likely March, possibly December. We don't need to worry about that for this pilot project. On slide 9, here's how the flow of this is supposed to work. So again, we might ask, last time we recorded this operation had 40 acres of land rented or leased from others. Is that still correct? If they say yes, we can leave the pre-filled value in the CAPI cell and just move on. If the respondent says no, you can ask them what the value is supposed to be, or if it was changed to something, and then you can just update the value in CAPI by tapping into the cell and erasing what's there. Slide 10. If you want to update the data, basically, like I just said, you're going to tap in the box and you're going to erase the cell. If the data are correct, you can leave it and go on to the next question. What I will say is that there are going to be some records that are going to have a lot of this NERD data available. And there's going to be some records that won't have a lot at all, maybe because they weren't in the March sample, maybe they didn't respond to the March survey, maybe because when they filled out the form, the numbers were so crazy we had to fix them in order to get them to work out just right. If the data is available, it will be in CAPI. If it's not available or if it was modified, then it's not going to be in there. Looking slide 11. Now, suppose a respondent refuses the survey or is inaccessible or goes out of business. There's still that pre-filled data in the CAPI instrument. Don't worry about trying to go back through and erasing any of the stuff that was there. If it's a refusal, if it's inaccessible, if it's out of business, that data is going to get scrubbed through other systems before it makes it all the way to the office. But for any complete report where we have positive data, you want to make sure that we can validate or change and update all the pre-filled data in CAPI before it gets submitted. Slide 12. We did make some subtle changes to both the pre-survey letter and the introduction screens on the Ag Counts website to notify producers of the possibility of the presence of this NERD. And we're not calling it NERD. That's just an odd name to begin with. I mean, it's, NAS, they come up with these funny acronyms for everything, but so somebody was having a good time. But we're not telling operators it's NERD. It's basically just essentially previously reported data, or previously recorded data. Slide 13. So on the pre-survey letter, and there is a copy of this both in the packets that we sent you this week and a copy on the website, the letter is going to have a statement which lets people know that if they complete the form online, that some of the questions may already be pre-filled with information that we have from past surveys. And it's over on the right-hand side. You'll see the highlighted portion over there. That's where you're going to see the new portion of the new wording of the letter. On slide 14, if the respondent logs in to do the report online using the Ag Counts website, what they're calling it CASI. Again, they keep coming up with these acronyms here. CASI is short for Computer Assisted Self Interview. It's what we've been calling EDR for years, electronic data reporting. It's the Ag Counts website. So anyway, where was I here? Sorry. So the statement's going to say like this: you may notice that some questions in this survey may be pre-filled with information we have from our previous surveys of your operation. We hope this information helps you complete the survey. Again, the goal of the statement is just to make sure that, producers are going to review and update that data that's pre-filled when it's valid. So on slide 15, just kind of summarizing here. So this non-edited respondent data is going to be pre-filled in CAPI and on the Ag Counts website if we have it in those applicable fields. Some records are going to have the data, others will not. We want to use the pre-filled fields to verify the current totals and perhaps speed up the interview. We don't want to forget that when we're reviewing the pre-filled data with respondents, we want to use that reminder and still method. Last time we recorded this. Is that still correct? If the pre-filled data are correct, you can skip on to the next question. If it's not correct, you just update it in CAPI. And if it's out of business or it's a non-respondent, don't worry about erasing the data. Operators were notified in the pre-survey letter and the opening screens about some of that data being there. And, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about this. So for some of you, I know you've been asking for this for years. And hopefully, if this pilot goes well, we'll be able to roll this out with every quarterly survey we do starting in 2022. At the same time, if you're the kind of enumerator that usually does a lot of your forms on paper first and then enters them into CAPI afterward, then you may need to change the way that you do your phoning so that you'll have access to the CAPI screens that have this previously recorded data during the telephone interview. So even whether you're going to be entering the data directly into CAPI or you're still putting it on paper and putting it in a CAPI later, you still want to be able to see what was previously reported for that operation, because you certainly don't want to call somebody back if you're going in like, oh, wait a minute, this is really different from what we had last time. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact your NASDA coordinator. And before we move on, I want to see if we have any questions about this new NERD pilot project. If you have any questions, you can let's go through by supervisor group and maybe we can get everybody accounted for. Does anybody in Denise's group have any questions?
I do not. This is Denise.
Okay. Lynn, do you or anybody in your group have any questions?
I don't.
Janet, anybody in your group, or do you have any questions about this?
This is Janet. I don't have any questions now.
Okay. Jenny Hawk, do you have any questions, or does anybody in your group have any questions?
I don't have any questions so far.
Okay. Rhonda, do you or anybody in your group have any questions?
I don't have any questions so far, but somebody else might. I'm not sure.
Okay. April?
I'm good.
Okay. Sherry?
Yep, we're all good here. Thanks, John.
All right. Last call for anybody who might not have spoken up before or forgot they were on mute. Have any questions? Okay, thanks everybody. So on slide 16, you see where we've gotten through so far. The next portion, we're going to be focusing on June area. I want to emphasize right off the bat, though, that I'm not going to be able to cover everything you want to know about June area in one teleconference. There are a ton of resources on the website. We've got all the extra new training videos. Hopefully that will get you where you need to be in terms of questionnaire content, purpose of the survey, and even how to use the CAPI instrument. We even left out there all the pre-screening videos for people to watch in the event that some people who didn't participate in the pre-screening activities in March and April may want to go back and look at all of that. So For the rest of this session, we're going to spend some time highlighting some of the major issues that you'll need to be aware of as we move forward in this next phase of the data collection. We're going to talk about the survey timeline. We're going to talk about handling matches with list surveys, the CAPI expectations and issues, guidelines for traveling to segments for observation purposes, and then we'll look at a few survey-specific issues before we take questions from the field. I also want to mention briefly that yesterday we posted another video to the Purdue site. There's a link to it right on the main page. Right below all the regular training videos, there's a thing which says excerpt from May 7th supervisor teleconference. We created a video that covers a lot of things we covered with supervisors a couple weeks ago. Not the entire conference, about half an hour of it. It was a pretty long conference. But that might help fill in some other holes as far as the way things need to be working for the June area survey for this year. If you have time to take a look at that new video, please do. If you've looked at it already, super. So I'm going on to slide 17. This year, the data collection timeline for the June area survey was broken into 3 separate parts, or phases, or tiers. If you don't want to call it phases because it gets confusing with ARMS phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, we'll call them tiers. Tier 1 was the pre-screening work that took place back in March and April. The Tier 2 data collection window begins May 21st, and the goal is to complete as many of these Tier 2 records during the week between May 21st and May 28th as possible. Now, we'll be leaving those records unlocked all the way through the data collection period in the event that you'll need to be using some time before May 28th to do, say, drive-bys around the segment. But the vast majority of these Tier 2 records are going to be non-ag tracts. There's a lot of them. There's probably about half of what's out there are these non-ag tracts. For the most part, the operation name should say non-ag. And if you see a name, an address, and a phone number associated with that non-ag tract, then most likely they were mailed a parcel map, just like the ones that we had during pre-screening. It'd be a matter of making sure that there have been no changes to that tract since 2019. And if there have been changes, you can work with the respondent over the phone to clarify on the parcel map where they are still operating, and then you can adjust the aerial photo accordingly. In some cases, depending upon how things were recorded in the past, the name that's linked to that non-ag tract might actually be accounting for a group of houses. I know some people in the past would have recorded, all right, this is the person that lives on the corner, and then we're just going to call the entire block of houses one tract. But we left one name on there, so you'll need to keep, hopefully there will be notes on those. If not, we may want to make sure that there are some notes added to those. The other operations which are available to enter into CAPI starting May 21st are what I'm calling the minor ag tracts. These are the operations, they don't have row crops, they don't have livestock, they don't have storage capacity, but they would qualify as a farm through other means. These are your horse and pasture operations, your CRP only operations, your fruit orchards, your Christmas tree growers. These are the folks that normally, when they show up on a crops APS survey, we don't even bother sending them out. We just code them up in the offices saying that they don't have any items of interest. For those, you need to complete the screener and the ag tract questionnaire, but I'm assuming the interview could go fairly quickly since they don't have a lot of the target crops that we normally are looking for during June. Now, one of the columns in your CAPI listings that can be made visible or invisible, and that most of the time you keep it as invisible because we don't use it very much, is this thing called DCMS. It's a data collection method strategy. If you want to get an idea as to who was mailed a copy of the parcel map, you can make that column visible. If the code says 220, they were mailed a parcel map in advance. If it says 400, they were not mailed a map in advance. In general, we tried to mail a map to anybody who we had a good name and a good address for. And where we didn't send out a map, those are going to be the folks where we didn't have a human name or address to send things to, like state forest or commercial buildings, railroads, cell phone towers, interstate highways. You know, those are records you can probably push through CAPI without a second thought. In fact, we have unlocked those records screener forms, so if you want to get a head start on those, you can. My only caution is that you may not want to submit everything right away in case you might need some of those acres from that land devoted just to cell towers or interstate highways in order to keep your total acres to being close to the reported, the digitized acres on the photo. Going on to slide 18. Now, the tier 3 operations, those are going to include what I'm calling your major ag tracts. And that's not to mean that these are big guys, but these are the folks that have row crops and storage bins and maybe cattle and hogs and hay, where the data that is reported is actually going to go towards the upcoming June acreage and grain stocks and July cattle reports that NASA is going to be publishing. The tier 3 records are also going to include any records that weren't touched during pre-screening, whether they were ag or non-ag, and any newly added tracts that were added during pre-screening to the sample, they are going to be moved into tier 3. Most of those operators were mailed a parcel map in advance. And in fact, if you screen them in as an ag tract back in March or April, you should also have a labeled ag tract questionnaire in your packets with you that hopefully you have all received by now. If you have not received your UPS package, please contact your supervisor, who can then reach out to your NASDA coordinator to let them know, because those were sent out last Thursday and Friday. You should hopefully have them by now. The only difference that you're going to see, that DCMS column determines who was mailed a map. It'll either say 220 or 620 if they were mailed a map, 400 if they were not. The only difference between a 220 and a 620 is that the 620s might be matched with an ongoing survey like Crops APS or Hogs or Arms One or Ag Yield, or maybe some low response cash rent folks. We need to keep those not available to enter data into until closer to the 1st of June, because those are all the ones where we're going to have that key reference date as of June 1. How many acres did you plant or intend to be planted? And we don't want to have a repeat. Remember, 2 years ago, we had these situations where we had so many prevented plant acres that, we might have gone out to them, before the 1st of June, and they hadn't had a chance to do anything yet. And by the time we got to the end of the survey, things had changed tremendously. So we don't want to ask the questions too much before the 1st of June. So I'm going on to slide 19. We'd like to see the ag tracts submitted on what we call a flow basis. So basically, as you get them done, please get them submitted. If you don't, we're not going to be able to keep up with it, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to keep up with it either. After you've checked over your work on paper, be sure to get it entered into CAPI maybe later the same day after you've gotten it collected. For the ag tracts, there is a saved for review button, just like you have with your other CAPI surveys. And your supervisor will be providing you guidance on how and when you should be using the save for review button versus final submission button. In particular, I would imagine that supervisors are going to want to look at like new segment records, just because it's a new segment. They want to make sure everything looks good before it goes on. They may want to check your work to make sure the Section D acres you reported balance, and that the minimum data requirements are met for each tract, that you put in the names and whether it's an individual operation or a partnership, and that you put in the Section D, or for the non-ags that you put in what the acres are and what the potential is for agriculture in that tract. As far as the due dates and deadlines, the last date to submit any forms in CAPI will be June 11th. For new segments, we'd like to get those submitted by June 9th, because we know those take a little longer to process because of getting all the new ads processed. In the office, we are going to be reviewing the data and analyzing, looking for outliers until June 17th. So we are asking you not to send any paper forms back to East Lansing until after June 18th. From there, we want to have everything back in the office by July 1st as far as the papers go. But if there's some question that we have, it will be better if you can hold on to the survey. This is just like what we did with ARMS 2 and with VegChem last fall. If we have a question, we can go back to you to make sure that what ended up in CAPI, and somebody's not muted. Can you double check your phones? Make sure that you have your phone muted. If you can double check if the office has questions to make sure that something didn't get lost in translation, maybe something that was intended to be 100 acres ended up getting keyed as 10 acres, or something just doesn't quite look right, we need to get clarified, then you'll have the paper copy we can always fall back on. As far as the photos, since the photos are going to be back in use during the objective yield survey, you can hold on to your photos up until October 1, or unless your supervisor tells you to send it back to East Lansing sooner. Again, not sure who's going to be working objective yield this fall. I'm not sure if we're going to need to have some photos moved around, but at this point, we're just saying as long as we have all the photos back in East Lansing by October 1st, we should be okay. Going on to slide 20. So there's a lot going on starting on May 28th. In addition to the June area ag track work, pretty much every survey we're doing with a June 1 reference date is going to begin on May 28th. You've got the June crops APS, you've got hogs, ARMS 1. Michigan has potato stalks and cherries. All states, we've got ag yield, we've got cash rents in counties that have low response coverage starting up. We also have the first field work for wheat objective yield in Ohio. Of course, that doesn't affect you that much, but this just keeps us all busy. It will be very important that you keep track of your time and your mileage on a daily basis. We also important to pay attention to the match surveys to make sure you're looking at the surveys with the earliest deadlines first and trying to collect all of that data at the same time. For example, if you see that you've got an ag yield that's matched with June area can go until the 11th, but ag yield gets done by the 6th. So in order to get this all done, we need to make sure we get the ag yield data in by the 6th. So maybe working with your operators to get all that data collected at the same time. You can talk with your supervisors about strategies that they might recommend for helping you to balance your load. I know some of you have a lot to call on, and we know you've been willing to take on some extra work with our call centers operating at a reduced capacity, and we do appreciate the efforts tremendously. But if you're trying to figure out what to work on a given day, what I would say is consider the deadlines for each survey. Crops APS runs until the 15th. So if you've got a standalone Crops APS to complete, maybe that one can wait until all the June area work is done. ARMS 1, that runs until July. So unless it's matched with something, those could be put on the back burner until all the other June work is done. June area ends on the 11th, but keep in mind, you might need to estimate for a bunch of tracks for non-response. So what I might almost recommend is trying to finish up a lot of your June area work by like the 6th or the 7th. So if you have to estimate for non-response, you have enough time to go back out to the segment and do some last-minute observations so that you can get that data entered into CAPI before the 11th. And entering all the area data is going to take a while in CAPI. Going on to slide 21. As for the matches with June area, like I said on the last slide, we want to pay attention to the dates that you'll want to have all the match surveys done by the date of the earliest match. Attached to each of the segment envelopes, in some cases it's inside the envelope, some cases it's on the outside of the envelope, there's a listing which identifies tracts in the segment which have matches with ongoing surveys. In past years, we did not label any list questionnaires. I'm sorry, unlike past years, we did not label any list questionnaires, but we this time provided enough blanks for everyone to be able to collect all the data on paper before entering the information into CAPI. When you're coordinating the data collection, some of the smaller surveys are going to ask a lot of the same questions uh, across multiple surveys. So, for example, in June area, you're already asking about total land, cropland, farm type, value of sales, acres planted for corn and soybeans on the operation. In some cases, you're also asking storage capacity, grain stored on June 1. On Crops APS, you're asking all those same questions, but you also, on the Crops APS, have the GM crop section. There's hay acres, wheat acres that aren't collected on the area. On the area, you're only getting the tract acres. You're not getting the whole farm on a lot of those commodities. For ARMS 1, you have, again, a lot of those same questions. Total acres operated, value of sales, but they also have that one dairy cow question. What is the largest number of dairy cows you expect to have on this operation in 2021? On the area survey, you're asking how many dairy cows are on the operation as of June 1. So there's a subtle difference there. But know your questionnaires. As for CAPI, in a very similar way with other surveys, there should be an asterisk next to the POID that's visible in your area listings indicating a match. There's also that, as I mentioned, that DCMS code that's available on the area side. If you see it says a 620 in there, then most likely it is a match with another survey. Now, what I will warn you is that this feature where you're able to see the matches with the asterisks was not tested as thoroughly as some of the other features in the system, and it is new. And so I don't expect that system to be perfect. Coordinating surveys across list and area frame isn't easy, and doing it in CAPI is a very new process for us. So it's possible that there's some things that got missed, but I would take a look on the paper sheets that will indicate where there's listings, where there's matches. You can look on the list side of things. You should be able to see asterisks on those where those list records match with list, and on the area side, there should be. I hope it's all linked up. It was not an easy prospect. Slide 22. Speaking of CAPI surveys, question is, what can you expect to see in area on your CAPI listings? Well, really what we're going to put out there is everything. For the list surveys for like crops and hogs or arms, you're only going to see the records that we want you to call on. In June area, you're getting everything. And the reason you're getting everything is that everything has to be accounted for in the segment. So you're going to see ag tracts, you're going to see non-ag tracts, you're going to see human tracts, you're going to see non-human tracts, you're going to see people with good addresses, people with bad addresses. You're going to have good phone numbers, bad phone numbers, good respondents, chronic refusals. You're going to see everyone that was pre-populated in the segment before pre-screening began. And you're going to see people that you've already marked from pre-screening that are no longer in the segment. You're going to see folks where you're ready to enter data, and you're going to see folks where you've already submitted the record in CAPI. The reality is, because we have to account for the entire segment, everything has to be visible. Everything has to be screened in as ag, it has to be screened in as non-ag, or screened out of the segment completely. Everything has to be classified once it's in the segment as ag or non-ag, and everything has to be estimated even if you don't get a good response. So to that end, it's unlike other surveys where we're only pushing out the ones we want you to call on. Here, you're going to see everything, and we have to account for everything. Slide 23. So now that you have all of it, what are you expected to do with it? Well, all the land must be accounted for in the segment, both ag and non-ag. That's no change from what we've been doing on this survey for years. All tract level records must be submitted in CAPI with the minimum data requirements met, even if the record is refused or inaccessible. Unless it's someone that is no longer in the segment, we need to account and complete the surveys. All segment level records, that summary button on the gray bar, those need to be submitted in CAPI after you've verified the total acres and the total tract counts. We can't leave any tract untouched. Either we've screened it out completely, you've screened it in as non-ag and completed the non-ag information, or you've screened it in as ag and you've given us the basic ag tract information. Now, when I say minimum data requirements for non-ag tracts, you need the name and address that we can work with. We need the acres in the tract. We need to know the potential for ag activity in the next year and what type of non-agricultural land is there. Just like you would record on the screener form on paper, we need all that information. For the ag tracts, at a minimum, and we have a little half sheet of paper that was included in your packets, and this has also been presented in some other presentations, we need at a minimum the name and addresses associated with a tract. We need to know the type of operation. Is it individual, partnership, or managed? We need the names of any partners that are listed. And we need Section D filled out completely. And any other notes that you can give us regarding what else is in the tract as far as livestock or any other things that you see that will help us fill out the survey. But at a minimum, we need to get everybody through what we call Section A, the names, and Section D, the tract information. Slide 24. Of course, we're not going to be able to get a hold of everyone, and we're going to have to submit some records as either refused or inaccessible. First and foremost, I can't say it enough, every record, whether it's ag or non-ag, we need to get that minimum data requirements that I just talked about. In one of the new CAPI videos we created, it's labeled video number 19 under the CAPI videos listing. I do get into that more in detail. You may need to go online or use other resources to confirm the operator's name and address if you can't find it or are unable to contact somebody within the segment. You might need to use acreage grids to estimate the tract sizes. You might need to complete the tracts by observation and just enter notes as best you can to explain the situation. But whatever you do, never submit an ag tract with no names and no Section D information. If you do, well, first, CAPI won't let you submit the segment, and that's something that's going to hose you up later. But more importantly, you will get a call from someone in the office to figure out what's there. If you want to have this as something maybe as an emphasis, first time I took a CPR course, I remember they had this drill sergeant that came into our office and was kind of showing us how to do it. And I remember the one quote he had that basically said, if you give CPR to a person who has a pulse, you will kill them. And, you know, that kind of stuck with me when you put it like that. And so I guess the way I would put it here is if you submit if you submit an ag tract questionnaire with no Section D information, we won't kill you, but we will call you. I guess that's where we're going to put it there. Now, switching gears for a second, in slide 25, I want to talk about a few things that we had some issues with during pre-screening that I'm hoping we can avoid during the survey proper. Suppose you need to add a new tract in CAPI. The first thing and most important thing I would say is that you need to make sure that all of the data was recorded on paper first. Don't try to enter things straight into the iPad without a paper backup. To add a new tract to the segment, you want to click on that Add button that's on the gray segment bar. The CAPI instrument is going to ask you if you want to add a new tract. You say yes, and click OK. And then it's going to ask if the person operates inside the red lines. You say yes, and then that's going to add a new line to the CAPI listings, and it's going to assign a dummy POID to that record. From there, you need to click on or tap on that newly created tract letter and number, we might say like G7 or I9, and enter the screener information all the way to the end. If it's an ag tract, you're going to get to the screen which says this qualifies as an ag tract. Do you want to screen another tract? Do you want to submit the tract and start the survey? For a non-ag tract, you've got to answer all the screening questions. No, 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 no. Then it will say, all right, this is a non-ag tract. You want to screen another tract or submit the survey. Once you get to those screens with those two buttons on it, screen another tract or submit, it's going to lock the tract into place. If you refresh your listings or log out before you get to that point at the end of the screener form, you could lose your newly added tract and lose your ability to use that tract letter ever again. And then you're going to go back and have to add those tract letters correctly and have to get new letters, and you're going to have to fix your photos. So don't just say to yourself, all right, I got 5 new tracts I need to add, so I'll click the add button 5 times and let them sit there and say, oh, I'm going to put that in tomorrow. When you hit the add button to create the new tract, you want to enter that information in for the tract, at least for the screener portion of it, right away. So slide 26. If you get out of the screener prematurely for a newly added tract, like I just said, you may lose that information that you already entered in for that tract and lose the ability to use that tract letter again. Another thing that can happen is that for a newly added tract, you can actually delete the tract. There's a big letter X on the left-hand side as one of the icons, like near the green telephone button. If you press it, it will remove the tract from your listings, but you will also lose the ability to use that tract letter again. So if when you're adding tracts, you see that a letter got skipped, then that's probably what happened, is either the tract got X'd out or the listings might have gotten refreshed before a previous tract was fully added. We saw probably across the region during pre-screening about 50 tracts that were added but not added all the way, so they got lost. So again, just as a reminder, if we lose a tract, we can't recover it, and you don't want to have to keep going back and updating your photos at the end. Slide 27. I want to mention a couple other things that you need to watch out for when you're entering the data into CAPI. There's 4 places where the CAPI instrument actually will give you warnings. In many cases, there'll be big orange banners across the screen that will hopefully catch your attention, because if you don't pay attention to those warnings, it could cause all sorts of problems downstream. And I guarantee you'll be getting calls from the office if any of these warnings are bypassed. Issue number 1. You can't change the name of the tract operator in CAPI on the address verification screen unless it's in a new segment or you're just fixing the spelling of the operator's name. And when you do that, you need to put in a comment explaining that that's what happened. Because the instrument is going to say essentially, if you have a new person here, you need a new tract. So if the person whose name is in CAPI is no longer operating in the segment, we need to remove that tract. And a new tract letter needs to be created, and those letters need to be accounted for by another tract operator. We can't just say, all right, well, it says Bob, it's not Bob, it's really Dave. I'll just change the name from Bob to Dave. It will give you a warning saying, you changed the name, you need a new tract. If you say, okay, whatever, and you submit it, I'm going to have a problem on my end saying somebody changed a name here. Now, if somebody had something where they inserted a middle initial, and that's the only thing that was done, it might give you that warning, but I would still put in a comment saying, all I did was insert a middle initial, it's the same person. So I know that there's really no change, that it's a minor name change. Second, we've talked about this one before. It's worth saying again, don't submit an ag tract with CAPI in CAPI that doesn't have section D acres spelled out. Third, please don't submit any non-ag tracts that don't have that information from the screener form columns 18, 20, and 20A, the acres in the tract, potential for future agriculture, and the type of land that's there. Finally, when you get to that summary button on the gray bar, it's going to let you know what your total tract count looks like and what your reported acres are compared to your digitized acres. If you please try not to submit anything that is not within 10% of the digitized acres. If it's wrong, then maybe we need to go back and look at the photo, maybe look for a missing tract, maybe look for some places where something got miskeyed as far as the total acres, but don't just submit something if the acres look wrong. Again, we've created that CAPI video number 19 that has some demonstrations that will show how those what those warnings will look like. And really, I would also encourage everybody to take the time to play with the CAPI training instrument. We did push out all the segments out to people so that they could have the time to work with it and try to get their kinks out, feel comfortable with the segment information that's being asked for before we go doing it live. So moving on to slide 28. Now, many of you are aware that for most surveys in CAPI, if you submit something prematurely, we do have the ability to unlock records in CAPI for most surveys, but June area of the process does have restrictions. For example, if you submit the segment level record on the gray bar, the summary, that record, the segment level record, cannot be unlocked, and it cannot be coded as saved for review. So you probably don't want to submit that segment level record until you are confident that you're done. Now, the screener forms and the ag track questionnaires can be unlocked for resubmission, but really, if the data has already been pulled in from CAPI into the office, then it's going to be a little work to get things actually updated. What I would say is, if you have someone that maybe you just have a couple of cells that need to get updated after we pulled the data out of CAPI, then it would be best if you just call someone in the office, your NASDA coordinator, your supervisor who can relay that, who can update the data manually over the phone. If it's just one or two items, then let's just do that over the phone and not try to resubmit anything in CAPI. If it's a case where maybe you estimated a record for non-response and then you submitted it, but then the operator calls you back and the numbers are completely different from what you submitted, then the office can unlock the CAPI record, have you update it, and submit it. But what's going to happen on the office end when we do that, we have to completely delete everything that was previously submitted. Now, if it's something where you're not sure whether the data has already been pulled in or not, maybe you hit submit and you're like, oops, I didn't mean to do that. We can unlock, it's been let's say within an hour of when you hit the submission, we can check with the office, hey, have you pulled this data yet? And we can take a look and maybe unlock it and have you resubmit. But if it's been pretty much rule of thumb, if you submit data in CAPI and it's been more than an hour and you're saying to yourself, oh, wait a second, I need to go back and change something in there, then you need to call somebody in the office and we need to do a lot of workaround. If it's one or two cells, we'll just fix it manually. If we need to submit an entire record, then we'll make that happen. But we really don't want to have to unlock those because it's a bit of a production to do so. Slide 29. I want to talk about the rules that we have as far as driving out and observing segments. Final guidance was published by NASDA on May 7th, and we have posted links to what NASDA sent to us on the Purdue GLR homepage. I also wrote up a lengthy piece in the last Friday feedback. I would recommend that you review those guidelines before you hit the road, but here's what it comes down to. You want to try to do what you can in one visit to the segment. And if the segment was not pre-screened, or if perhaps you were not the enumerator who did the pre-screening, because we've had some assignment shifting since March and April, then you can take a trip to the segment, find the track boundaries, find your landmarks, find out what ag is there, what's non-ag, get the lay of the land before you begin making your telephone interviews. And then while you're out there, try to anticipate the fact that you might not ever get a chance to talk to anybody over the phone. So maybe take a look at what's happening each track. What's being planted? Is there a homestead? Are there livestock? Are there grain storage facilities? If the segment was already pre-screened, then you might be able to get permission to go out and visit the segment towards the end of the survey period with the goal of observing and estimating the Section D acres for non-response if you can't get a hold of anybody by phone. In some cases, you might need to take 2 trips. Suppose, let's say you go out on May 24th, next Monday, and you saw a lot of cropland, but nothing was planted. The fields are tilled, but nothing's there. You couldn't figure out what was there. Maybe it hadn't emerged yet, and you couldn't get a hold of anybody by phone. In those cases, maybe you'll be able to go back out on like June 8th and see if you can figure out what was there. So I guess in short, when you go out to the segment on your first trip, try to do as much as you can and try to anticipate that you're not going to be able to talk to anybody. And if you need to take a second trip, you're going to need to get prior approval and be able to justify your need for a second trip. Slide 30. When you're out doing your observation, you want to keep a keen eye out on everything. So you want to note your landmarks, your road names, identify the tracks and locations with operators over the phone. You should note addresses on mailboxes or on the sides of houses to get your bearings. You'll want to note any landmarks within tracks, like ditches or tree lines or waterways. You'll want to document non-ag tracks with good descriptions. You'll want to observe any agricultural production. Take note, what crops are out there? Are there livestock visible? What do the grain bins look like? You should also be looking for agricultural potential. Is there fenced in pasture? Are there livestock barns? Do you smell manure? Do you smell chemical sprays on fields? Is there tilled ground out there that looks like it's ready to plant? All the while, knowing that you're expected to complete Section D if you don't get a good response, and knowing how hard it has been to get hold of these people over the phone, we want to be ready to expect the worst. Slide 31. Above all, please stay safe when you're out and about. Be sure that you're following the social distancing recommendations. Yes, the CDC has put out some recent changes to things, but still, let's be smart out there. You've got your personal protective equipment, your masks, your gloves. Of course, you can buy it and charge it to NASDA. Wash your hands thoroughly with hand sanitizer, or use hand sanitizer after interacting with anything outside of your personal space. Limit exposure and contact to others. Don't stop to meet with respondents. Don't stop at county offices or FSA offices or office buildings to find out what's going to be going on in the tract. Plan your efficient routes when you're out there so you're not out and about longer than you need to be. Think about your other safety guidelines. Have, bottle of water with you so that if you're out in the hot sun, you're going to keep your sunscreen, all those kinds of things to stay safe there. Be sure to pull off the road when you need to take notes about a particular portion of your segment. All right, going on to slide 32. These last few slides, there's a few things I want to highlight about the changes to the questionnaire and items that have been issues in the past. First, in Section D, we're not collecting field level data anymore. So please, you do not need to mark off fields on the photograph. That doesn't mean you have to erase the fields that were on the photos from 2 years ago, but unless it helps you when you're working with the operator, there is no need to mark off fields on the photo or on the paper form. Second, at the end of Section D, there's a question about double cropping. And it's tied to item code 844. In past years, the question on Section D in June area was always asked about, are there two crops planted in the same field, or do you have dual utilization of the same crop within the same field? So those might be things like, one cut of hay, one cut of haylage, or, you might have a wheat cover crop followed by soybeans. For 2021, the question was changed. And actually, in one of my videos, I had to redo one of my videos to fix this. We're asking specifically about double cropped acres, where we're saying two different crops were harvested out of the same field in the same season. So you're harvesting wheat for grain followed by soybeans, or you're getting multiple harvests of certain vegetable crops like cucumbers or lettuce or what have you. The dual utilization acres do not need to get recorded here. Multiple cuts of hay and haylage do not need to get recorded here. Just straight up double cropping. And then that's going to be followed by the question of how many acres of soybeans were double cropped. And again, what they're looking for are really double cropped soybeans, not soybeans followed by a cover of wheat. In section H, be sure you're paying attention to the calf crop and the relationship between the number of calves born on the operation and the number of cows on the operation. I would say that of the videos that were put out there with the cross-regional team, I would say that this was one of the cases where it was not really emphasized very well within that video, which you would think, somebody from Texas putting a cattle video together would have a little bit more thought. But in cattle, they don't have a lot of dairies, so that's something that kind of throws some things off there. You're going to have some of those dairy operators who aren't going to be reporting the male calves that were born on the operation that were moved off almost immediately, because the dairies, don't have much use for them, so they might not even acknowledge that those animals were born and moved off already. Also, we want to pay attention to the number of cattle on feed that were reported. Again, that's supposed to be based on the number that are on a ration and are intended to go directly to slaughter. It is not, oh, I'm feeding all of my cattle. Why wouldn't you feed all of your cattle? No, it's in terms of you're getting them ready for the slaughter market. So that's a different definition there. In sections I and J, this is the sheep section and the goat section, we're not asking for inventory anymore. But again, this was also emphasized in the video they created. If an operation has sheep or goats, please ask and take notes as to what they have. Because if these folks then show up on the January sheep survey or the January goat survey, and we don't have any good information about them, about, how many they had in June, or whether they were Angora goats or milk goats or meat goats or pet goats, and we have to estimate for those guys for non-response, it's almost impossible, especially if we have no basis for what they've got. So the more information you can provide for us on any sheep or goats that are on the operation, the better. Then in section L, when it comes to labor, be sure we're talking about workers who were paid to do work for the farm in the capacity of the agricultural production. The general rule of thumb, they're talking about workers on the payroll. But there's always a lot of debate about what to include, what not to include. Do we include custom work? No. Do we include contract work? No. Do we include domestic help? No. Do we include petting zoo workers? No. Do we include retail workers? There you get a gray area. On pages 637 and 638 of the interviewer's manual, there are some details that can help you clarify when to record labor and when not to record labor. But generally, if the operation is maintaining a payroll and is issuing W-2s, or they are paying cash wage and issuing a 1099 for work paid, then we do want that counted. All right, 2 more slides and then we're done. We're on slide 33. Please pay attention to the comments on each record. As I noted earlier, everything is getting pushed out to you to account for, including perhaps some reluctant respondents. You're gonna have, those are hardcore refusals. They might have gotten pushed out to you, and you may not know that it's a hardcore refusal until you try calling them, unless you've read the comments. There may be comments about operators who are in multiple segments, and you will want to coordinate the interviews in order to minimize the respondent burden. There may be some matches with ongoing surveys that are indicated. And there may be comments about partners that need to be added or dropped based on contacts we've had with these operations over the past 2 years. There may be some very old comments on the comment sheet that are no longer relevant and may need updating. There may also be a special comment sheet in your segment envelope that we printed on purple paper that will indicate that some change already took place or might need to take place for certain tract operators. And long story short, the comments are going to indicate situations that are going to require attention. And if you don't read the comments until it's time to enter the records into CAPI, it's going to be too late. We did insert comment sheets for all the ag tracts into each individual questionnaire, and the comment sheets for the non-ag tracts were inserted into the segment envelopes. The purple sheets were also inserted in the segment envelopes. And just, I'm going to go on the side note here on these purple sheets. There's about, maybe in Indiana, there's about 50 of them total. The segment envelope on the label is going to say like PS-LSF. And inside, what you're going to see is a note. It will probably talk about an operator who is deceased or an operator who is retired. And what we did with those is that we split them all up and we did a lot of research to try to figure out, should this guy still even be in the segment? I mean, obviously, if they're deceased, we said, let's take them out in March and April, figure out who the new operator is, and get them added in into the mailing list for what just got mailed this past week. There should be notes written all over it. Jamie Price did all the research on these. We spent weeks on these, but I would definitely make sure that you're looking at those, and it will help make sense as to what is happening with that operation. You might go in and you're like, wait a minute, this guy's already coded is no longer in the segment. I wonder why. Where'd this other track come from? I don't know what's going on with it. Then the purple sheet will help explain those. Slide 34. In closing, I know I presented a lot of material and I presented it fairly quickly. There's a lot to digest. As I said, we are recording the teleconference, so if I went over something a little too fast, we can go back and listen to this later. But of course, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to pick up your phone. First person to call will be your supervisor. And if they don't have an answer for you, then they're either going to call a NASDA coordinator, or they're going to call me, or we're going to call Ty Tolbert, who is our deputy director. Remember, no question is a stupid question. Even if you think it's a stupid question, it's better to ask a stupid question now than to make a stupid mistake later. But in reality, the only stupid question is the one that isn't asked. And with that, I want to open up the floor to questions. So again, I'm going to go down by supervisor group to make sure we get everybody accounted for, and then we can circle back if we have other questions or thoughts. Denise, do you or anybody in your group have any questions?
John, I do not have any at this time.
Okay. All righty. Let's go.
I have one. This is John Early.
Hi, John.
Hi. I just got my packet yesterday afternoon. I know there's one slip in one of mine. This guy just recently said absolutely no more contacts or anything. He's very irate at the field office, I guess. How do I handle him?
He's going to have to be done through observation. I mean, we're just going to have to observe the track. If it's in an old segment, then hopefully we've got the track boundaries already pretty well defined. You also should, within the segment, have the FSA maps and listings, and maybe that can verify whether or not he's still operating where we expect him to. So we'll probably be able to keep the name. We'll code him up if he's got a partner. We'll keep the partner attached, and we'll try to do our best to estimate at least the Section D acres, so we know how many acres are in the tract, what's been planted to what is in pasture, what's in woods, what's in waste. And then beyond that, if there's nothing else that can be observed, if you can't see any livestock, then we'll just, we can leave those sections blank and just leave notes as best you can. But I would say just do that one by observation, just like we would have back before this whole pandemic began. Does that help? John, you still with us?
Does that help me, John? Thank you.
All righty. Any other questions from Denise's group? Okay, Gwen, do you or anybody in your group have any questions at this time?
Well, I have one. If the FSA acres, that sheet comes out, and it's a lot different from what was recorded from a previous, old segment. What are we gonna do with that? It's kind of confusing.
If the FSA acres are showing something complete, well, first off, I guess that would be to see what the operator says, to see if it's acres that maybe in the past they had it, but now they don't, or if they actually have cut back on the acres that are there. If the respondent doesn't get a hold of you, we do have a memorandum of understanding with Farm Service Agency, and they were also sent a letter from us and a letter from their administrators to essentially remind them that they're gonna be asked to cooperate with us in cases where we might have trouble getting a hold of people by phone. In the past, FSA has really insisted on, if you have questions about this, we're not going to do it over the phone. We want this done we want this done face to face. But FSA basically was told NASA and NASDA need to do this. We're all working from home. They're doing their best. You need to cooperate with them. So give them a call, see what they can do. If they're being difficult in getting that level of cooperation, then we might need to kick it up a little bit, and that's where maybe we can get Nathaniel a bit involved to make some calls to the new, I guess is the acting state executive director at this point, to kind of put some pressures on the county offices to help support what we need. We sent out packets yesterday to all the county offices across the region, letting them know what we were doing. We even showed them copies of the parcel maps we were sending out, so that they're aware that this is going on. So, and again, it may still vary from office to office how much cooperation we can get, but I guess the best is just going to be to do our best and not just assume that one or the other is right. If we can get the operator to confirm some things for us, best. If we can't, then see what we can get out of FSA to confirm some things. And if we can't, then we're just going to have to make some reasonable estimation based on experience in the segment, maybe just have to attribute it to somebody that we might not be able to confirm. It's not ideal, but it's the best we might be able to do.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from someone in Gwen's group?
Yeah, John, this is just sort of a general, and it comes because of cash rent, and some of the people that I do have for cash rent or have had the cash rent are also in my June area. And you guys have been giving us cash rents, pulling them back, giving them back to us. Normally what I tell the person when I'm, call them and leaving a message or send them a text message that they can do it on paper, they can do it online, or they can call me. Well, if you guys are pulling them back from us, does that mean also they can't see it if they try to do it online?
That's a good question. They can still see it. We've taken them off of the iPads for the CAPI listings, but we have left them available for them to still be able to do online. So right now they've been essentially recoded as. Yep.
On that, because I've had a few that wasn't sure telling that was the correct thing.
Yep, that is correct. The ones that were removed were ones that were in counties where we have the adequate coverage already. So if we get the extra report from them, great. But right now we are at a point where we can publish those. There's about, out of the 20,000 records that we started with, there's probably only about 2,000 records that are still out there that we were looking to get some boosted coverage on. And those are the ones that are available on your iPads to do.
Do we know which counties we need more as of yet?
If it's on your iPad, we need it.
Okay. Right.
And if it's not on your iPad, then we're good.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions from Gwen's group? How about Janet? Janet, do you or anybody in your group have any questions at this time?
I do not at this time.
All right.
Hi, this is Deborah. I have a question about getting the June area survey on CAPI. I wasn't able to do it a month or so ago when we were doing the pre-screening, and I haven't tried lately, but could you go over the process of
Okay.
getting the June area onto Cappy?
So what I'll say briefly here is that the June area listings are separate from the rest of all the other listings. In order to find them, in the upper right corner of your Cappy listings are these things that look like two gears, and then there's like a little red star on that. Those are the grid controls. If you click on the grid controls, this is where you can change your view, where you're looking at group by POID or group by survey, and then there's a group by June area. If you click on the group by June area options, then you should be able to see your listings, but you'll only be able to see the area stuff. In order to see the other surveys, we then need to go back into group by survey or group by POID, and then that will get you back to those. And if you're having other trouble, if something isn't also quite working right, you can definitely give us a call. There are a bunch of little short videos on the website for the Cappy itself. They're called, it says Cappy area videos. They start, from the very basic of how do I find my listings to what is it that I'm looking at. Like when I talked about that gray bar today where you can add tracks or where you can look at a summary of what's in the segment. That is all described in those. So if you get a chance to watch them, hopefully those will help too. But I've had to help out a whole bunch of people in the last few months on this. So we can look at that if you're running into any jams. Sorry, say again? I think I just missed what you just said, or what you were just asking. All right. Well, why don't we move on to Jenny Hawk's group? Jenny, do you have any questions, or anybody in your group have any questions?
No, but I just wanted to clarify something. At the very beginning, when you were talking about that, starting the 21st, we could go out and start looking at the non-ag tracks and the ag tracks that had just like horse and pasture. You didn't say a date on that, and I just want to make sure that reference date to start that is the 21st.
Yes. So as I said, what happens is those records are going to be unlocked in Cappy on the 21st. So you can start entering the non-ag information. You can start calling your minor ag, your horse and pasture, your CRP only folks as early as May 21. You and your people may want to use that time to also do your first observations of the segment as well. Not just say, okay, I'm going to do all the ag work, all the non-ag work up to the 28th and not even think about the ag tracks until the 28th. You might want to start, doing drive-bys on the segments on the 21st, 22nd, 23rd to do your observations and then make your calls, next week on the 24th through the 28th, so that you kind of have everything lined up. And some of you might, starting today, start doing the drive-bys. We just can't enter anything into Cappy until the 21st. And we're not going to, it's not like we're going to turn off the non-ags. We're going to leave everything open until June 11th. But we want to say, hey, if you've got these non-ag people, these minor people, that they're not going to impact the June 1 estimates that are published, let's go ahead and let people enter those into Cappy now. And as I said, or on the 21st, I've even unlocked the folks that we know are non-ag, the commercial business tracks and the ones where there's no name associated with it. Like I see if it says Interstate 465, that there's nobody to call. There's nothing else that needs to be changed. There's no reason why we probably couldn't just submit those now to get them out of the way in order to help stretch and spread the burden. So does that help?
Yes, that does help. Do you review the procedures for the crop stocks, cattle check boxes on free? Some people, I know when I was first enumerator, that really confused me, that section.
All right. So, And for the benefit of the recording, I'm actually pulling up a copy of the questionnaire to share here. On page 3, there are some questions which ask essentially which sections are we going to need to complete. So for any, if for an old segment, the check boxes at the bottom, there's a checkbox for crop stocks and a checkbox for cattle. In all old segments, either they will be pre-checked or they will not be pre-checked. So the first question, are these boxes at the bottom checked? And if the answer is yes, you just go on to section D. If the answer is no, then we're going to ask the following questions. Is this a new segment or a new tracked operator? If that's the case, you want to check both of those boxes. If it is not a new segment or a new tracked operator, then we'll go to the next question. Was it non-ag last year and agricultural this year? Then we'll check the boxes. If no, then have you changed or corrected the operation name, operator name, partners, addresses, any of that information? Then we want to check the box if it wasn't previously checked. Now, what those check boxes do is help guide what sections of the questionnaire need to be asked. And specifically where it comes into play is on the top of page 8 in section E. It says, is the crop stocks box checked? And if the box is checked, that means we need to ask these questions that are starting on page 8 about the crops that are grown, and then continuing on to page 9 about the grains in storage, the crops and the stocks. They call it the crop stocks box. For the cattle box, if the cattle box is checked, that means we need to ask about the cattle questions. If the crop stocks box is not checked or the cattle box is not checked, that means that those operations are probably already in the cattle sample or are in the crop stocks sample, and we don't need to get that information because it would essentially be duplicated. So when the boxes are checked, we ask the questions. When the boxes are not checked, and you've gone through all the things to say, well, should this box be checked? If it's still not checked by the end of it all, then we can skip the questions on the bottom of page 8 about the crops, we can skip page 9 about the stocks, and we can skip the cattle information on page 12. In CAPI, there are not questions that will ask you about that because the routing and the logic will be there. The computer will know, is it a new segment? The computer will know, is this a newly added track? The computer will know, did I change the partner names? Did I change an address? So behind the scenes, CAPI is going to be checking the boxes or keeping them unchecked appropriately, and it will ask the questions that need to get asked. So if it's an old tracked operator and we haven't changed the names, we haven't changed the addresses, and there's basically no change from the previous year and the box wasn't checked before, what you're going to notice is that CAPI is going to skip over those sections about the crops and the stocks and the cattle appropriately. Does that help?
Yes, that was nice explanation. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else in Jenny's group have any questions?
Yes, this is Alan.
Hi, Alan.
I have a question about maps we were mailed.
Okay.
Did add and subtract so many blue boundary lines. I had the wood on separate text, and it's now included with the farm operator.
Alan, can you repeat the question? I want to make sure I heard that correctly.
Well, the blue boundary lines on the
Mhm.
a lot of changes from what the Minnesota had. Property lines. The wood is back with the farm operator. I had them all separate.
All right. So, okay, so you're talking about we have the big aerial photos that we've marked off in past years. We've got the blue track boundaries, we've got the red field boundaries, but then this year we have these color photos of the segments, but they're not broken down by the tracts. They're broken down by different property lines and parcels. And there's two different kinds, and you might see them on yours. Those be there's the ones that have the FSA tracts marked off, and there's ones that just have parcels. Those parcels that are there do not correlate with what you've already put on the aerial photo. What they've had to do this year, so that we could have at least some common link with operators, is they've sent them those parcel maps. So they have the numbers that might be 1 through 22. In some cases, I've seen some that have even a few hundred parcels on them, to kind of just look at where the property boundaries are, so that when you and the operator are working over the phone to figure out where these tracts are, what you might need to look at is first at your aerial photo and say, all right, well, I've got tract B, and tract B covers up this upper third of the segment here. But on the parcel map, it's broken down as different people's properties that the guy might be renting from. So you might have to say, well, this is parcel 6, parcel 12, parcel 18, and parcel 22 are really making up tract B on your photo. Now, what we couldn't do last year, or what we couldn't do this year, was to send out a copy of the marked up photo to the respondents to say, hey, this is what we have marked for you as tract B. We couldn't do that because we just didn't have the resources to do that. In future years, not that we're going to have to do this by phone ever again, but we have talked about the idea of keeping, still mailing something to respondents. We'll take these photos and we will digitize them and mark off, okay, this was tract A, tract B, tract C. So in the old segments, when we mail out an advance copy before we go visiting the operators, they'll see the photo that they'll see, the picture 11 by 17, will have the tract letters on it as opposed to parcel numbers on it. The only ones who would get parcel numbers might be the new segment operators. So what I can say is that, yes, there's going to be some confusion because those numbers on the 11 by 17 do not correlate with what's on our aerial photo. And it's unfortunate, but it's the best that we can work with. So what I would try to work with for these old segment operators, look at the photos, look at where the segment, look at where each tract is located, try to reason out for yourself, okay, this guy, based on where I have tract B here, must be operating this portion of the segment and these different numbered parcels here. And then when you're working with the respondent over the phone, in theory, they're going to have that photo, or they're going to remember having received that photo. It says in the envelope, do not discard this map. And you'll be able to coordinate with them. It's like, okay, well, last year, looks like we had you operating in parcels 2, 16, 12, and 22. Is that still correct? And they can say, well, no, I picked up part of parcel 32 over here as well, and then try to do your best to coordinate and resolve what might not be right. And it's not going to be an exact science, but we'll just do our best. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, thanks, Alan. All right. Anybody else in Jenny's group?
I did not check in. I don't have a question. I just didn't check in this morning, so
right.
I wanted to let you know I was here.
All right, thank you, Deb. I will get you checked off here. Thank you. Did anybody else possibly arrive late? Bruce Andrews, I didn't have you checked off before. Did you arrive? Or Jennifer Wagner? I think those are the only two I was waiting on.
Yeah, Bruce Andrews just couldn't find the mute button.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mike, this is Marcella. I just wanted to let you know I got checked in about a couple minutes after 10.
Okay. Well, glad you could make it. I wasn't sure you were going to make it here today. So.
I had to make special arrangements, but I did it.
All right. Appreciate you being able to join us here today. Why don't we move on to Rhonda's group? Rhonda, do you either...
Jennifer Wagner, can I check in?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, I will get you checked off right now. Thank you. Rhonda, do either you or Steven or Jan have
Hi.
any questions?
I don't have any, but the boys might.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Jan. I have a couple, actually one question and a point.
Okay.
If I understood right, it's okay to use the FSA office by telephone, but not to visit. So I thought we weren't to contact them at all, but I think if you stated that differently a few minutes ago.
Yes, that is correct. They will be willing to, they should be willing to work with us by phone. And a part of the reason to not visit the FSA offices, of course, they're all teleworking as well. So you might not find anybody there. Give them a call, maybe set up some kind of time that you can try to work with somebody to resolve what we've got here. They hopefully have the right Jamie just sent me a quick message, so I'm just trying to lose my train of thought. Sorry. Yes, they should be willing to work with you over the phone. And if you have an office that is being difficult with you, let somebody know, and we will do what we can to get some cooperation from some higher ups.
Thank you. Second thing I have one section that's got a lot of really large number of 2-acre and greater residential areas. A good way to get a head start on that, which I did yesterday. I know I'm a little bit early, and I know you can't add anything into CAPI till the 21st, but I went into GIS and identified either whether the same owners were still there on these residential tracts or if we had new ones. So I've already found a half a dozen that have changed ownership since the last time we did that segment. And I will say it's very, very helpful that the parcels are now blocked off or marked off on the segment map. That makes it a lot easier when you've got those type of greater than half-acre residential areas. Essentially, that's all I wanted to say.
All right. Appreciate the comment, Jan. Again, and I would emphasize too, it's CAPI that cannot be entered into until the 21st. But, just like what Jan said, if you want to start doing the research, if you want to start doing the drive-by, looking things up on GIS, and start fixing some of those on paper so that when CAPI opens up, we can get started right away, you are welcome to do that. I am not telling anybody to not do any June area work between now and just to wait until the 21st. You can start now if you're ready to do now. We just don't want to. We can't enter anything into CAPI this early, and we definitely don't want to do interviews with big ag operators until closer to the 1st of June, because we need to get those numbers as close to the 1st of June as possible.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. April. Does anybody in your group have any questions?
Confused, although I looked in CAPI and saw a difference because on the supervisor teleconference, she said that non-ags were not mailed parcel information, but it's showing that they were, but that's on the old segment. So I assume that's because you're wanting us to contact every single one of those. Because my understanding was that you weren't going to waste the money mailing to non-ags at all. But that only is the ones that we did in pre-screening.
We did.
Correct.
Yeah. So to clarify, what we did not mail to were folks, and not even folks. Basically, if it was not human, if I did not have a name or an address that we could mail something to, then it was not mailed. So if the segment just says, state forest, or the tract says it's a state forest, or the tract just says 40 residential homes, or it says Interstate 65, or it says CSX Railroad, there was nobody we could send something to. And even if we looked up the address for CSX Railroad, there's no point. Why would I call INDOT to find out that if there's any ag happening next to the interstate highway. So those we didn't mail anything to because those were assuming there's non-ag, there's no potential, there's no point. But we had to keep it open so you could submit something. If there was a name, even if it was non-ag residential, if there was a name of somebody that we could mail it to, as a rule, we did send them the parcel map, and we did send them, the notification that they would be called. And not only did they get them during, if there was a new segment, they got it during pre-screening, but they will also get it if they weren't touched during pre-screening. They'll get a second map here, like this week, with the goal that, yeah, we do want to confirm that those people are still living there and that they can still be contacted, and that, even when we're talking to them, we might want to say, we're going to be doing this, we do this survey, we'll probably come touch base with you once a year to make sure nothing has changed, just so that we can keep our records up to date. So everybody who we had a name and a mailing address to, as best as possible, we did send something to. In the new segments, if it was already screened in, screened out, obviously it was screened out or it was submitted already, those were taken out of the mailing list.
Okay. That was the difference. It was just the ones that we pre-screened that you did not send stuff to. And this time, it's only in the old segment that the non-ag did get stuff.
Correct. The old segments, correct. If in an old segment, because they hadn't had a map before, but these are the folks that we would normally have driven by, year in, year out. Hi, you're still here. Just make sure there's no changes. You're not involved with agriculture. You didn't buy a horse. We would have done that anyway, or we would have resolved it through GIS. Those folks we did mail a map to. For the new segments, if they were screened in as non-ag totally, and we know they're done, and we've got all their information, then we did not mail them anything this time. If they were populated in pre-screening and nobody touched it, and nobody went into CAPI to say, yeah, this guy's non-ag, we don't need to do anything with him, then those guys did get rolled back in to the second mailing. And there was probably, out of about 2,600 names that we mailed to back in March, there's probably about 200 that were never touched and never went through the screening process during pre-screening that ended up back in the mailing list. Does that help clarify?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Anybody else in April's group with any questions? All right, let's move on to Sherry's group. Sherry, do you or anybody in your group have any questions?
I think we're all good.
All right, thank you very much. Before we close out of this, I want to turn the floor over to, and actually I just see now this note from Jamie reminding folks, let's say you contact an operator who throws away their map and they don't have the map and we need to get them another copy of the map. Reach out to the office. It's not an easy process, but we can reconstruct the pre-survey letters and get something sent out to respondents if they need to get another copy of the photo. Alternatively, there is also the EDR survey code that is on your segments, the printed blue screener forms. Over on the right-hand side, below the county name, there will be a survey code, which will indicate a way in the code that they can use to pull up an electronic copy of the map online. Now, if they don't want to do that, and they want to get a hard copy, they really want to see a hard copy, we can get them a hard copy. But there is that option of pulling those up online. They can't do the survey online, but they can pull up the parcel map online. But with that, also, I do want to give the opportunity for Jamie Price, our distinguished NASDA coordinator for the state of Indiana, to say a few words to you folks. Jamie?
Hey, Johnny, this is Jenny Pop. I have one question.
Okay.
About if they tossed a map or the EDR survey code.
Mm-hmm.
Since that photo that is mailed to them only has the field numbers on that, can't you take a picture of it with your phone and text it to the operator?
You could do that too. Yes.
Okay.
That is also a good option. In fact, thinking about other enumerators working with supervisors, when you're starting to work with quality control, remember you have the photos, but your supervisor does not. So possibly you might need to take a picture of your segment photo to text to your supervisor so that they can go over, especially the new segments with you, to make sure that we can reconcile and resolve any issues before things go through final submission or quality control. And with that, let me turn it back over. Jamie?
Good morning, everyone. I've got a few things I would like to share with you. Number one, I was looking at Indiana crop weather, just trying to see where we were as far as percent planted for corn and beans. And for corn, this week we were at 62% with 34% emerged. And for soybeans, we are currently at 50% planted with 22% emerged. Some of you may be wondering, so what? Why is she telling us that? Well, what I'm hopeful is, by the time you get out there, I know if you go out early, you know, things may not be up and you may not be able to see what's planted yet. But by the time you get to the non-response, those folks that you can't get on the phone, I think that most of the state should be planted in about a week and a half. As you know, a lot of it depends on the weather. Towards the end of this week, we're supposed to have some decent weather. So I'm hoping, you know, that Indiana farmers can plant thousands of acres pretty quick. They just need a few days to be able to do it. So I'm hopeful that when you get out there to really observe what you need, you'll be able to tell what's up. So I wanted to share that with you. And also, John talked about the comments that are there from us to you. We also need a lot of comments from you to us. And if you don't know how to do that on CAPI, your supervisors do. But no matter how minute you think it is, please put lots of comments in. And before you submit it, read the comments and make sure they make sense. They may make sense to you, but remember, we're not going to know what the situation is. So, you know, write as much as you need to write. And if that's not sufficient, then send your supervisor an email with just the point, track, segment, whatever you need to do to identify it, no name, and explain the situation. That just helps us when we get to the part where we're editing the data. We don't have to make as many phone calls back to clarify situations. The other thing is that I want to encourage you to be in constant contact with your supervisor. I know that sometimes things come up and you don't want to tell your supervisor that maybe you're struggling, you can't get such and such done, you're behind. Please don't do that. Let them know. And they'll be in contact with you as well. But don't be afraid to ask for help. We've got a lot of people that are willing to reach out and do extra work if necessary. Short time frame to get this done in. So start as soon as you can, work as much as you can to get this done. And don't be afraid to tell your supervisor you're struggling. And with that, this is a productive survey under the circumstances. I know it's not what we want, but it is what it is. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks, Jamie. Does anybody? Okay.
On this added two letters to replace issues. I mean, people that weren't in and are now in, and on this updated thing, they're still not there. So let's add them again, I assume.
Why don't we take a look at that one offline here, April, and we can take a look at that segment specifically.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything to add for the good of the order? All right, well, not hearing anything else at this point, I want to thank everybody for their participation today, for their continued cooperations and their patience as we've been going through these very difficult times and trying to still make this all work. Know that you are all greatly appreciated for all the hard work and everything you do. We could not do what we do without your help, and we recognize that every day, and we wish there was more that we could do for you. But on that note, I want to thank everybody for their participation today, and we hope to see you all again very soon.